Because they'd be like, oh, there's Pennywise the clown, let me grab a bite of popcorn. Oh, now why is Beverly's dad in the sewers? Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Faith, and thank you so much for watching. Today is another episode in the series where we compare books to their film or TV show adaptation, and today we are doing It. And as always, before we get into it, I do need to give a couple disclaimers first. First of all, this video is going to contain spoilers for both the book and the movies. And notice how I just said movies. We are comparing this to the 2017 and 2019 adaptations of the book. As you can see, this is a really big book. It is almost 1,200 pages, and the movies together are roughly 5 hours, so I can't cover everything. I'm going to cover the major points that I noticed. And like the rest of the videos in the series, I'm going to focus more on the differences than the similarities. If I spoke about every single difference between the book and the movies, we would be here for hours, so I came up with about 20 of the biggest differences that I noticed. I'm gonna try to focus on differences that I don't see people talk about as much, really just so that this isn't like every other It book versus film blog or video that you see. So hopefully I'm able to point out some differences that you might not have noticed. And lastly, if you're watching this, you've probably either read the book or watched the movies, or both. And if you've done both, you probably know that the book does not go in chronological order, but for the most part, the movie does. And in my opinion, it's less confusing to go in chronological order, so we're gonna go based on the timeline of the movies. As always, I'm gonna do my best to talk about everything in order, but there is a chance that I've mixed up a couple. So I apologize in advance for that. And those are all the disclaimers I can think of, so let's get into it. The first thing actually kind of covers the book and the movies as a whole. The book has a ton of racist, misogynistic, homophobic, anti-Semitic themes, and the movie didn't cut all of them out, but it cut a lot of it out. The book also has a lot of weird sexual content involving minors, and thank God the movie did not include that. For example, the movie cut out the infamous orgy scene. And I also just recently learned that apparently some people were mad that that wasn't in the movie, so if you are one of those people, you are weird. But moving on. The timeline of the book versus the movies is also different. In the book, the scenes in the past take place in the late 50s and the scenes in the present take place in the mid 80s. And in the movie, the scenes in the past take place in the late 80s and the scenes in the present take place in the mid 2010s. But moving into actual plot points of the book, we're going to start with Georgie. In the movie, when Georgie dies, that's pretty much the last that we see of him, other than when Bill sees his ghost. But his actual physical body is technically never found, which implies that Pennywise ate him. But in the book, one of his neighbors actually finds his body almost instantly. Georgie does get his arm bitten off both on screen and on page. However, in the book, it's more implied that he kind of died from the blood loss of that. At least that's how I took it, because they found his body, so you wouldn't have found his body if Pennywise ate him whole, like it's implied that happened in the movie. Also, one of the main driving points of the plot in the movie is Bill looking for Georgie's body, but because his body is pretty much found instantly in the book, that is just not something that happens in the book. There are 7 kids, and they're all the same in both the book and the movie. However, in the movie, Bill, Eddie, Richie, and Stanley are already friends, but in the book, it is only Bill, Eddie, and Richie that are friends. In the book, they're more of just acquaintances with Stan, and then Stan kind of gets roped into the Losers Club, along with Beverly, Ben, and Mike. But in the movie, Stan is already a part of that group, and then Ben, Bev, and Mike come in later. And that's not super different. It pretty much just changed Stan's standing with the group. However, it is just something that I noticed as I was reading. And moving away from the losers, and clarification, I don't think they're losers, but they call themselves the Losers Club, so I will be referring to them as the losers. We're gonna quickly move to one of the bullies of the group, Patrick Hofstetter. In the movie, Patrick is killed off very quickly, I think roughly 20 or 30 minutes into the movie. But in the book, he dies much later, so we do get way more scenes of him. And in my opinion, in the book, him and Bowers were pretty equal with how much of a bully they were. And that's not me saying he wasn't a bully in the movie, he definitely was. But because he dies so early and we get way less of him in the movie, it's hard to say that he's on the same level as Bowers, just because we get way more of Bowers in the movie than we did of Hofstetter. But back to the losers, we're gonna go ahead and talk about the fire. This is definitely one of the more obvious differences that I noticed. However, I don't really see that many people talking about it. In the movie, one of Mike's main fears is the fire. However, in my opinion, it's not really explained that well. But basically, in the movie, Mike and his parents were in a house fire. At least I'm pretty sure that it's a house fire. I don't remember if it says exactly. But anyways, Mike is able to get out. However, his parents are not. So his parents were unfortunately burned alive. And that, understandably, is where Mike's fear of the fire comes from. However, in the book, the fire isn't even a part of Mike's backstory. It's a part of Mike's dad's backstory. In the book, Mike's dad used to be in the army. And while he was in the army, he frequented a bar called the Black Spot. And most of the customers at this bar were black. And one day, it was burned down by a white supremacist group. A lot of people died in the fire. However, Mike's dad was fortunate enough to get out barely. And in the book, the whole reason we know about it is because Mike's dad is pretty much on his deathbed and he is telling Mike this story. So in the book, the relation Mike has to it is that it happened to his father, but in the movie, Mike was actually involved in the fire. I also just find that an interesting change because in the movie, that is pretty much Mike's entire backstory. And then in the book, it's like not his story at all. But moving back away from the losers for a second, we have Edward Corkin. And if you've only seen the movie, you might be like, who is that? And that's because the movie literally only mentions him like once or twice. However, in the book, we get a really long chapter with pretty much his entire backstory. The gist is that Edward and his younger brother were severely abused by their stepfather, and their stepfather actually ended up killing his younger brother. And then Edward is later targeted by it, and it appears as his younger brother. Kind of the same way that it torments Bill by showing up as Georgie. And his backstory isn't like insanely important to the plot. However, I did just want to bring it up because I kind of think it's funny that in the book, we get a ton of information on him, and then in the movie we talk about him for like 5 seconds. And going back to the losers, we're going to talk about Beverly real quick. This one actually came as kind of a shock to me, but Beverly's mom is in the book. She's not like a massive character, but I do think she definitely plays a role in shaping Beverly's personality in the book. In the movie, her mom never makes an appearance. Honestly, I can't remember if it actually says what happened to her mom, but I did look it up and it does say that in the movie she died when she was younger. So yeah, and I'll go back to that in a second, but I do need to point out this other difference first. In the book and the movie, she is being abused by her father. However, in the movie, she is aware that that's happening, but in the book, she's kind of like not. And going back to her mom, I do think her mom being present in the book is the reason she's not aware of it really in the book, because her mom, in my opinion, did sort of enable the behavior, or at least she didn't stop it or care enough to actually look into it. Because now that I'm thinking about it, there is actually a scene between Bev and her mom where her mom does ask, does your father touch you? And Beverly's like, well, yeah, he always touches me, you know, like doesn't think anything's wrong with it. And for what I remember correctly, her mom does kind of just brush it aside. So really just in the book, in my opinion, she's not the most caring mother. So I do think that plays a role in Beverly not really being aware that she is being abused. And then in the movie, with every scene with her and her dad, you can definitely tell that she knows that their relationship is not normal. I do think that you're dealing with a very fine line when you're talking about the portrayal of abuse in media, but that is an entirely different subject, so I'm kind of just gonna leave that there for now. Moving on to Richie. If you read the book, you know that Richie does impressions like pretty much every single time that he speaks. In the movie, he definitely still does the impressions, however, it is way less. Like seriously, between both movies, he does it less than 10 times. Whereas in the book, I'd say probably 75% of the time he's speaking, it's doing one of his impressions. In the book, I think that's fine. However, in the movie, I'm really glad that they toned that down because I feel like that definitely would have gotten annoying after a while. And speaking of Richie, the movie, especially the second movie, makes it very clear that Richie was gay or bi and he had a crush on Eddie. However, that's not really in the book at all. There's like a few moments when it's them in the past that could kind of imply that. However, when they're adults, I can't remember a single thing that implied that he liked Eddie. Speaking of Eddie, we're going to go ahead and talk about one of his main solo scenes in the book, and that would be the scene where they're talking about placebos. In the book, from what I remember, this was a very long scene. And then in the movie, literally like all you get is that girl that's always at the pharmacy. She's like, those are placebos. And then Eddie's like, what? And then that conversation pretty much just ends there. And then a little while later, Eddie does confront his mom and he's like, these are gazebos, which I still laugh at every single time. I think that's hilarious. But that's like all you get in the movie. And honestly, it really makes sense with how much they shorten that down. It is very risky to put that long of a scene in a movie where it's pretty much just back and forth dialogue between two characters. But that scene did stick out to me in the book, especially the length of it, so I wanted to include it here. Now we're gonna get into the Pennywise side of things, and a couple of the points I'm about to bring up are somewhat similar, so just bear with me. In the sewer scenes, Pennywise transforms a lot in both the book and the movie, but in the book, almost every single one of his transformations was a full transformation. And for the sewer scenes in the movie, I don't think it ever was a full transformation. And what I mean by that is that in the movie, he always had either the head or the body of a clown, but in the book, he would completely get rid of the clown persona. Like he would fully transform into the teenage werewolf or fully transform into the spider. So the movie definitely stuck more with the theme of the clown. And I did look into why that choice was made in the movie, and it seems like they just thought that because of how quick the changes are, it would be too confusing if somebody were to like reach down and take a bite of popcorn or look away for like 5 seconds. Because they'd be like, oh, there's Pennywise the clown, let me grab a bite of popcorn. Oh, now why is Beverly's dad in the sewers? And going kind of along with that, he takes way more different forms in the book than he does in the movie. In the book, he might show up just as Paul Bunyan, or just as the teenage werewolf, or just as the creepy painting lady. But in the movie, those transformations are also done with the clown. Like, for example, in the first movie, for the library scene, Ben is being chased by the headless boy, and then all of a sudden it turns into Pennywise the clown. And another thing that kind of goes with that is the differences in Pennywise's transformations from the book to the movie. Most of his book transformations were based on like 50s pop culture. For example, the teenage werewolf, the mummy, I'm pretty sure at one point he was Frankenstein. And in the movie, it's a lot more specific fears like the headless boy and Beverly's dad. And that's not to say the book doesn't do the specific fears, like the blood is still present in both the book and the movie. The creepy painting lady, the leper, those are specific fears. And the movie also does have the mummy, if I remember correctly. However, those pop culture transformations are more present in the book, and the specific fears are more present in the movie. And moving away from Pennywise, but sticking with the supernatural stuff, in the book, Bill goes on this weird time-space journey, and he meets the turtle, aka the creator of the universe. This does not happen at all in the movie. The closest scene in the movie that I can think of would be in the second movie, towards the beginning, when Mike kind of drugs Bill, and then he is like shown all these things that Mike saw. But in that weird little psychedelic trip that he has, he still doesn't see the turtle. And I'm kind of just gonna leave the turtle at that, because I can't lie, reading that I was very confused with what was happening, and I don't want to give you very wrong information. So at this point, we're kind of nearing the end of the story, and you might be like, how are we already at the end? That is because, guys, there are literally so many differences. I simply, again, cannot touch on all of them. In both the book and the movie, Mike is attacked in the library by Henry Bowers. However, how that scene plays out is drastically different in the book and the movie. In the movie, Mike is on the floor, Bowers is over him, getting ready to stab him, when Richie kills Bowers. So essentially, he saved Mike, and Mike is, for the most part, okay, and he is able to go to the sewers with the rest of the Losers Club, and he is in that final battle with Pennywise. However, in the book, Mike is not saved by Richie, and Bowers does stab him, and it is pretty bad, and at that point in the book, he is pretty much out for the count. He is not able to go to the sewers with the Losers, and he is not present in that final battle with Pennywise. Personally, I liked that change in the movie just because it was all of them, minus Stan, finishing it off together, so it felt more complete in my opinion. Going back to the very beginning of the second movie really quick. In the movie, we get a very minimal view of Bill's wife and Beverly's husband, but in the book, they actually both follow their spouses to Derry. Now, I don't mean Bill and Audra go together and Beverly and Tom go together, but Audra, Bill's wife, and Tom, Beverly's husband, do figure out where their spouses went, and they do go after them pretty much. And real quick before I get going on this point, if you have not read the book, I would like to point out something to you. In the book, at the hotel that they're staying at when they are older, Bill and Beverly hook up. That's obviously not in the movie. I just wanted to point that out because before I read the book, I didn't know that that was a thing that happened, but it is. But anyways, back to Audra and Tom. Tom, the weak and pathetic little man that he is easily influenced by it. So Tom actually ends up kidnapping Audra and bringing her down to the sewers. And in the sewers, they are both exposed to the deadlights. Tom, again, the weak, pathetic little man, immediately dies because he's a loser. Audra, however, does not die. However, she does go into pretty much a coma. Now, please don't be mad at me, but we are going to skip to the very end now. I'm doing that because, like I said at the beginning, I'm trying to focus on the differences I don't see people talk about as much. And that whole final battle with Pennywise comes up in pretty much every single It book versus film thing that you could see. So I'm so sorry. Again, please don't be mad at me, but I am going to skip over it. After Pennywise dies in the film and everyone has went back to their regular lives, the losers all get sent a letter from Stan, and the film ends with a voiceover of what that letter says. In the movie, this does bring some closure to Stan's story that we did not get in the book. In the book, there's no note or anything, so his death is pretty much his death, and that's it. But the book ends with Audra and Bill riding on Silver, and Silver is Bill's old bike. And like I said, Audra pretty much slipped into a coma, so when they got on this bike, Audra pretty much was still in a coma. But then, like, as they're riding the bike, she kind of wakes up and becomes lucid again. And Stephen King, being the weird little freak that he is, felt the need to mention how Audra reaches a hand down and feels Bill's erection. So yeah. And now we are at the final point that I have. In the book, once everyone leaves, they all start forgetting again. In the movie, that does not happen. Bill literally says to Mike, "Why do you think we're not forgetting it this time?" And I will say, I really liked that change. I hated that they were forgetting each other again in the book. And I will say, I'm a sucker for a happy ending. I prefer happy endings, so I personally did like that they remembered in the movie. And I know Stephen King's endings are like famously hated, so I don't know if that is something that people don't like about the book, but yeah. And guys, that is it. I've said it multiple times in this video, I'm gonna say it one more time. Some of the differences in the book, while they are a main difference, I didn't want to touch on them because pretty much everybody touches on them, and I tried to be a little different in this video. But anyways, there's a new episode of this series the last Sunday of every month. So far I have done A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, Jurassic Park, Alice in Wonderland, and Little Women. So if you like any of those books or movies slash TV shows, you should go check those out. And I think that is all that I have for you guys today. Be sure to like and subscribe and follow my Instagram and my TikTok, which are in the description, for more bookish content. I hope you all have a spooky Halloween. Love you guys. Bye!